is the most hostile place on Earth. It has claimed thousands of lives. Killers lurk beneath the waves.
The sharks would come up in the water, then we'd hear somebody scream, and that would be the end of that person's life.
It can be freezing cold.
The first people are starting to actually die of hypothermia, and they just didn't stand a chance in those conditions.
The ocean is also a battlefield.
The only way you could stop your ship, you had to blow them out of the sky. If you didn't, they'd still get you.
Only the lucky and the brave survive. For thousands of years, great battles have taken place on the oceans. If you control the high seas, you control the land. Today, the biggest and most devastating naval vessel is the aircraft carrier.
Aircrew are now manning for the 1900 launch. It will be a case-free launch, case-free recovery. Temperature is 86 degrees, altimeter is 3001. It is now time for all unnecessary personnel not involved in flight operations. Immediately leave the flight deck and catwalk areas. For everyone else, it's time to get in complete and proper flight deck uniform. Helmets on and securely fastened. Goggles down. A clear visor for tonight's operations. Sleeves rolled down. Life vest on and securely fastened. Check your pockets for any loose gear and quad. Make sure all your tools are accounted for. Check chalk, keys, and loose gear about the deck. Start up all the go airplanes, start them up.
Well, an aircraft carrier is certainly 95,000 tons of diplomacy. You know, we think of this ship as a war machine, but it can be viewed as a peace machine too. If that friendship fails, we have the weapons to influence events around the world.
Aircraft carriers are the most powerful and complex ships afloat. The largest nuclear-powered carriers are over 1,000 feet long. That's as long as the Empire State Building is tall, and they are as high as a 20-story building. This is more than a ship, a mobile airport with its own air force. Taking off and landing has always been dangerous, sometimes fatal. But after much trial and error, aircraft carriers were ready to leave their mark on history. In 1941, Japanese carriers were used to launch the bombers that attacked Pearl Harbor. Modern carriers can support 80 planes, many of them supersonic fighters. There are massive hangars and workshops with 4 gigantic elevators to lift the planes up to the flight deck. Even these mighty ships are too small to have a conventional runway. Instead, they use a steam catapult. They hurl the planes from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 1.5 seconds. And if the engines fail on launch, the planes have to ditch into the sea. These pilots were lucky. They ejected just in time.
All right. Today we're going to go out and do a AIM-120 AMRAAM missile shoot. Time hack. We got that off the platform.
Naval pilots have the right
Second
stuff.
leg on the way out is going to be standard coming out. When we get out here, we're going to switch up range control.
Taking off from a carrier is the ultimate thrill for Lieutenant Jeff Cooper.
Takeoffs are fun. It's like being in a shotgun. Just boom, there you go, you're off and running. What is it, like 1.7 seconds you're going from 0 to 150?
The aircraft are launched day and night.
Nighttime takeoffs are different. You can't see. The second you leave away from the carrier deck, all those lights that were up there on the island disappear. All of a sudden you shoot off the end of the carrier and you can't see anything. You're like, oh man.
The fighters carry sophisticated weapons, capable of destroying targets in the air, on the sea, and on the land. An aircraft carrier is like a floating city. There's a massive crew of 6,000 people whose sole objective is to keep 80 aircraft ready for action. This is an extremely dangerous place to work. Planes take off and land only feet from the ground crew. The deck is tightly controlled by the air boss.
There's a big team effort here. We've got, in our department, in the air department alone, we have 650 people working very hard on the flight deck, directing the aircraft, refueling the aircraft. There's a lot of people making sure everything goes exactly the way it's supposed to.
Keeping track of the planes on the USS Harry S. Truman is Lynette Lewis. She keeps the air boss updated as the planes take off and land.
We list every single aircraft that's going to come and go. This helps boss know when people trap, when people launch. And when he asks, we've got to know right away who's left to recover so we don't shut down everything with someone out. 412 on deck. 412. 4 to recover.
The crew is always on alert, constantly practicing their drills. In charge of every operation on the USS Harry S. Truman is Captain David Logston.
It takes a lot of years to be able to understand how this all fits together. It's also very important that we be precise in what we do. We have a mission, and time is very important. So we get airplanes airborne on time, they put their weapons on target on time, and they come back safely on time so that we can do that all over again. It's a very complicated and very dangerous business that we are in. It doesn't take much to have one small mistake cause a catastrophe around here.
The most dangerous part of a pilot's job is landing on the carrier. The runway is short, and the pilot must hook onto a wire stretched across the deck while traveling at over 150 miles per hour.
Coming to land on this thing, it's not very big. It doesn't look very big, at least, because you're going so fast, you're coming from so high. You put yourself on the ball for 17 seconds with your life and other guys that are less than 60 feet away from your wingtip as it comes at them at 150 miles an hour. You got to be able to just put all that in the back of your mind and do it.
During World War II, pilots often returned from missions exhausted and with damaged planes. Even after the war, pilots were killed trying to land on carriers. This jet went over the side. Despite desperate attempts to save him, the pilot drowned in his cockpit. Today, pilots are carefully guided down with electronic systems and a team of trained controllers. Hooking the wire is the moment of truth.
When they land, they go to full power so that if they do miss a wire, they're going to be able to fly again. If they were to go to idle, the aircraft would not have enough speed if it missed a wire to fly, and it would end up in the water.
If they miss, they have only moments to react.
First time I missed all the wires because I find myself shooting off the other end, throwing the power all the way forward. So I went ahead and put it in afterburner because I was scared. So you go from one instant thinking, all right, I'm going to be on board here any second now, to, oh God, I still got to fly and try this again.
Aircraft carriers are always ready for action, patrolling the seas of the world.
I can't imagine the day when they would do away with aircraft carriers. They may not look like this. The aircraft may not look like this either. In fact, there may be aircraft carriers in outer space. They may be called starships. I think there will always be a need for something to base our aircraft on and be mobile.
But no ship is invincible. Even carriers are vulnerable to the most determined attackers, suicide bombers. Near the end of World War II, Japan was desperate to destroy the attacking U.S. warships. So they created the most deadly strike force, the kamikaze. Their planes were packed with high explosive. It was a one-way trip. Floyd Smith was a gunner's mate on the carrier USS Franklin. His ship was repeatedly attacked by Japanese warplanes.
I personally was afraid. I'm not afraid to deny it. But to save your home, you fight. And that's the attitude we had. That was our ship. That was our home. It's our job to protect the ship any way we could.
In October 1944, the USS Franklin was in the Philippines when kamikaze planes were spotted coming towards the ship.
Yeah, I looked up 20, 30,000 feet in the air. There was about 6 of them up there. And the sun was hitting them, and they were shining. And that's when we got ready to start firing. The only way you could stop them from hitting your ship, you had to blow them out of the sky. If you didn't, they'd still get you, because that's what they come out there for. They can do more damage in 5 minutes to an opposing navy than a sea battle could do in hours. And that's what they've done.
Eventually, one kamikaze broke through the barrage and hurtled straight at the ship.
We seen him coming in from the stern. When he got within range, we started firing. And he made his dive, and you could see the very bottom of that plane. I thought to myself, that's the biggest airplane I ever seen. Flight deck, the flame flew over our gun mount, and he got me and the gunner's mate next to me and burned us.
The plane crashed through the flight deck, killing 52 men. During World War II, 288 American ships were hit by kamikaze. 34 were sunk. 2,658 seamen died off Okinawa alone. USS Franklin was repaired, but in March 1945, it again came under attack, this time from Japanese dive bombers.
On the 19th, a lone Japanese plane managed to sneak through the fleet, and he dropped 2 bombs on the flight deck.
The blast tore the ship apart.
Everything aboard the ship just went up. Gasoline, planes, had bombs up there was blowing off. The flight deck, there's dead man laying all over it. There's airplanes blowing up. So many people killed. I've never seen such fire in my life. I hope I never see nothing like it. It's just something that you don't want to live through twice.
The Franklin started to keel over. Damage control teams flooded compartments on the opposite side of the ship and saved it from capsizing. The USS Santa Fe took off the wounded, and the crippled ship was towed away from the Japanese coast and further attacks. 724 men died on the Franklin during the bomb attack. Crippled but not broken, she finally made her way back to New York. Floyd Smith was lucky to survive.
It comes back to me all the time. I had a lot of good times, I had a lot of bad times. It's something that you hold on to the rest of your life. I'll never forget it.
But even in peacetime, the ocean can be a killer.
The sea is the mother to the sailors. You respect it, you listen to it, and if you challenge it, you'll lose.
No matter how big, no matter how powerful, no ship is a match for the awesome strength of the sea.
Generations of seamen have lost their lives at sea, and it is just as dangerous today. The sea is equally capable of destroying the most modern supertanker as it was of taking the lives of the Greek sailors many centuries ago. The ocean can best any of us on any given day. Man is still nowhere near able to conquer the sea.
Every year, hundreds of vessels are sunk by extreme weather. Thousands of lives are lost. The numbers would be much higher were it not for the efforts of the U.S. Coast Guard. They risk their lives to save others. And to do this effectively, they must first understand and respect the power of the sea. The best place to learn is out on the waves. Each summer, every new cadet from the Coast Guard Academy must spend 5 days aboard the USCG bark Eagle to learn the basic craft of sailing a tall ship. The Eagle is 295 feet long. It was built in 1936 by the German shipyard Blohm & Voss and used by the German Navy to train its cadets. After World War II, the Eagle was presented to the U.S. Coast Guard as a war prize and has been training American cadets ever since. This year's cadets are about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. Among them are Elaine Cherry and Michelle Miller, first-year cadets traditionally known as swabs.
I come from Detroit, Michigan, and The Academy has been my dream for so long as I can remember, actually, and just seeing the Coast Guard go out there and do search and rescues to save people, help other people that are in need.
Right, flying outer inner.
Cadet Miller has spent much of her youth sailing, but this is Cadet Cherry's first time at sea.
I'm terrified. I've never been under sail before. I don't know anything about sailing, but that's what I'm here to do, is to learn.
These cadets will spend their working lives on high-tech boats and aircraft, but first they have to train on the distinctly low-tech Eagle. In charge is Captain Ivan Luke.
We train cadets on a sailing ship and not a motorized vessel because there's no better way to connect them with the sea, with the basics of the wind and the wave and navigation, but more importantly because there is no better laboratory for teaching leadership, for building character, for expanding personal horizons.
I'm very excited to be under sail. I'm learning a lot. I love pitching in and helping, but we all have to work together. And that's the most important thing we're trying to learn right now, is how to function effectively and quickly as a team, not as a single unit.
This is the way God intended people to transport themselves across the world. We're using the wind that God provided for us, shut off that evil diesel engine that pollutes the air and makes noise, and this is spectacular.
There is over 21,000 square feet of sail and 5 miles of rigging. Fully rigged, the Eagle can reach speeds of 17 knots.
That's a buoy.
The swabs have a busy schedule learning all about practical seamanship, especially navigation.
At a given time, we're going to punch it into a computer and we're either going to...
Even though most modern navigation is calculated electronically with global positioning satellites, the cadets must learn to navigate using the traditional tool, the sextant.
The horizon. You do that by turning this knob. The knob also has numbers on it, which we will help you read. Our people are going to be working with professionals in the marine industry. One of the things that they will need is a level of professional credibility. This is a standard entry-level skill for all qualified mariners worldwide.
But the biggest challenge waits for them 150 feet above the decks. Third-year cadet Jeff Owens is taking swabs Miller and Cherry to the very top of the mast.
No watches, no rings, nothing in your pockets. Everything's secured with lanyard.
Yes, sir.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go. Okay. Take it nice and easy. Don't go too fast. It's okay. You all right back there? Some are scared, but it's like a rite of passage to come aboard Eagle and go all the way up and to say, I did that. I knew I could do it. Kind of like a barrier, like crossing the threshold into like the Coast Guard Academy.
It's a long way up.
All right, come on in.
And when you get up there and you look around you, you know you're not alone. There's other people out there with you. You look around and you see this great big ocean that you're a part of it now. You're sailing, you're out there looking out over the water, and it's an awesome experience to be part of this.
Next, they climb out onto the yardarm. There are no safety nets.
Hold on, we're taking some good rolls, okay?
Yes, sir. Should I clip in?
Yeah, clip in. Everybody clip in.
Stop.
the best experience I've ever had. You know, I never thought I'd be 150 feet above a big hulk of wood and water in the middle of the ocean. It's awe-inspiring. You just want to hang back and look around and say, look what I'm doing.
Nobody's standing around.
It's the biggest rush I've ever had to go up there and know that you're so high up that you're 150 feet in the air and all that's supporting you is really your legs and your hands and maybe a little clip here and there.
You know, sometimes you want to quit, you want to come back down, and if you dig down deep, you can find it inside of you to keep going. I wanted to quit. I really wanted to quit, but I didn't.
The power of the sails takes everyone by surprise.
It's just awe-inspiring to look at them and know that that's what's making us go, and to think that, you know, I just came out of high school, but yet I can sit here and I can say I helped put those sails up. I know somewhat what I'm doing compared to everyone else who's never even been on one of these.
The sea inspires generations of cadets.
It's amazing. I didn't think it could be so blue. I thought it would be black or brown, and it's incredible. You can see white caps, you can see dolphins. There's lots of things that you take for granted if you're on land.
But the sea can be unpredictable.
Respecting the weather at sea is the one crucial element to survival, because at any given moment the sea can become really violent. If you don't respect the sea's awesome power, sooner or later it's going to bite you.
The sea is a tough place to survive. Every year, thousands of people end up in the water, where they face a merciless killer, cold. When the Titanic sank, the cold sea claimed the lives of 1,503 people. The temperature of the sea that night was 4 degrees below freezing, much too cold to survive.
All of those that went into life rafts or lifeboats survived. The remainder, over 1,400 people who went into the water, all died. So I think you can see from that the primary killer is not likely to be drowning, it's not likely to be an inability to stay afloat, it's much more likely to be cold. The right hand is 59.9.
Professor Mike Tipton is a leading expert on survival in cold water.
When we read of the very prolonged survival in life rafts or in the water, almost inevitably you'll see that they're in warm water, because as soon as the water temperature becomes very cold, the threat of cold and the threat of hypothermia prevent you really from surviving very long. I'll give you the countdown to go on that. Go.
Professor Tipton is carrying out an experiment to find out how cold water affects our strength and dexterity.
Okay, that's very good. That's 24 seconds.
Volunteer John Brooks is lowered into water that has been cooled to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That's still 31 degrees warmer than the ocean when the Titanic sank.
That's good. Stick with it. Stick with it. That's very good. Just breathe freely. Well done. Well done, John.
His first response is shock.
When you first hit the water, there's a sudden fall in skin temperature, and that initiates the cold shock response. And really the most dangerous aspects of that are a sudden gasping, a big breath in. You take a large gasp in. Now that big breath in is uncontrollable, so if you happen to have your face under the water or a wave is breaking over the face, that big breath in will suck water into the lung. And you only need to suck in about 1.5 liters to actually end up drowning.
You cannot control your breathing, you're almost gasping for the air to get in, and you're hyperventilating so fast.
How are we doing, Claire?
Core temperature 36.9.
There is also a risk of heart attack
all of the periphery of the body is shutting down and sending the blood into the centre, and at the same time the heart is beating faster. Now for somebody who's young and fit and healthy like John, that's not a big problem, but for somebody who's maybe a bit older, a little bit less fit, has got cardiovascular disease, it's that sudden increase in the work of the heart that can produce a heart attack.
Temperature of 36.
John has been in the water for 10 minutes.
It's cold, very cold. I'm shivering pretty extensively now, and you feel quite painful on the extremities, your fingers and your toes. So it's very, very cold.
But one man was trapped in much colder water for 6 hours and survived. Paul Barney was traveling on the car ferry Estonia across the Baltic Sea when giant waves ripped off the front of the ship. It was the middle of the night when the Estonia began to sink. Paul Barney and 15 other passengers managed to scramble onto a life raft. The water was just 52 degrees Fahrenheit, life expectancy 2.5 hours.
Most people, I think, were in a degree of shock. I certainly was. You can't think clearly, you can't do anything, you can't function. I wanted to try and slow my breathing down and try and get my senses back.
Within minutes, the cold claimed its first victims.
The first people are starting to actually die of hypothermia. The older guys who came out of the ship with very little clothing just didn't stand a chance in those conditions.
After an hour, Paul Barney lost the use of his hands. He was losing heat rapidly.
I've just started getting hypothermia. My body temperature was already horrendously low, so to stop moving and to fall asleep would have been certain death at that stage. Other people were falling unconscious and perishing around me, but I hadn't really finished with my life, and to end it here would have been a dreadful waste.
After a grueling 6 hours hanging onto the raft, Paul and the other survivors were finally rescued. Of the 16 people who had climbed onto the raft, only 6 were still alive. Paul had survived, but his body temperature was dangerously low, well below the normal 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius.
When they said I had a core body temperature of roughly 28 degrees, but strictly I should have been unconscious anyway at that core body temperature, so I was really lucky to be still conscious.
Paul Barney's survival was nothing short of a miracle. Normally at this temperature, the heart would stop beating and you would die. Paul survived because he managed to climb out of the water. It saved his life. Cold water is much more deadly than cold air.
The water sucks the heat out of the body at much greater rate. As a result, somebody in water will cool about 4 or 5 times faster than they will in air at the same temperature.
In cold water, people sometimes make the mistake of swimming to keep warm.
One of the problems with swimming is that you send blood out into the muscles of the limbs. Now the limbs are ideally suited for losing heat. They're like a radiator. So when you send the blood into the limbs, you send deep body heat into the limbs. It's then lost very quickly to the environment. About halfway then, John. Well done. You okay?
Cold water quickly impairs our nerves and muscles.
Hard as you can now.
John has been in the water tank for only 20 minutes, but both his strength and manual dexterity have decreased dramatically.
With a decrease in muscle and nerve function comes an inability to do things like deploy life jackets, open and fire survival flares. So you must get those essential survival actions out of the way as soon as you possibly can and before you lose the ability to do them altogether.
But even in warm water, there are dangers.
We simply say really that if you're in water below 25 degrees Celsius, then cold is your primary problem. When you're in water above 25 degrees Celsius, the primary problem changes from cold to shark.
This man survived 4 days and 5 nights in an ocean teeming with lethal killers. Harlan Twible was on board the warship USS Indianapolis when it was sunk at the end of World War II. His is one of the greatest of all maritime survival stories.
We were in the water for 4 days and 5 nights. And during this period of time, we had no food, no water. We had no reason to understand that anybody knew that we were in the water. So all that we had was hope and prayers.
880 of Harlan Twible's crewmates died in the shark-infested waters of the South China Sea. The USS Indianapolis was sailing from the Pacific island of Guam when it was struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes. Harlan Twible, a gunnery officer fresh from the Naval Academy, was on watch.
I yelled, "Abandon ship," and I jumped into the water, and then all these bodies rained in after me. I suspect that most of these young kids were as terrified as they could have been. Certainly I was terrified, but there was no question in my mind as to what was going to happen to the ship. It was going to go down. So I yelled to the men, swim away, because I knew that we would be sucked under.
Within 12 minutes, the ship had sunk. There were over 1,000 men in the water.
Everybody was wounded. It seemed that shrapnel hit everybody on that ship. I saw people helping other people. They themselves were not well. I saw people holding up other people while they themselves were dying. I saw people break loose from the net to go out and rescue their friends who had broken loose, who were hallucinating and had lost their minds. I saw greatness that I would never see again in my lifetime. If ever there was a time that man exhibited the fact that he loved another man, that was the time.
They had no food or water, but they faced an even greater problem: sharks.
When the shark showed up, it gave us another trauma we had not looked forward to. The sharks made no noise. They would come up in the water, and then we'd hear somebody scream, and that would be the end of that person's life. There were swarms of sharks. It wasn't just one shark, it was a bunch of sharks. Probably hundreds. They had found a feeding ground, and that's what they were interested in. None of us knew what would satisfy them. You know, were they going to eat us all, or were they going to leave us alone?
As each day passed, the sharks picked off the men one by one.
Night was a blessing to us because we never knew when the sharks were attacking at night. I think the greatest fear that was when we knew the sharks were coming, and we didn't know which one of us was going to be caught. That fear stayed with us for the whole 4 days and 5 nights.
Finally, a Catalina seaplane spotted the men in the water. Harlan signaled the pilot with a tiny mirror, and 2 ships were dispatched to pick up the survivors.
They finally pulled me out of the water. My life jacket had become so waterlogged that the water was up to the top of my chin. So I didn't have much more time to go. I still didn't think that I would die.
Of the 1,197 people on the Indianapolis, only 317 survived. Harlan Twyble will never forget the sacrifice made by his shipmates.
They gave their tomorrows so we could get our todays. And they did. They gave up all of their lives so that we could live. My crew happened to be a big giver.
This ship is one of the most important vessels in the U.S. military machine, yet it carries no guns. It sails right into the heart of the action, but it carries no defenses. Without it, many people would die. This is the USNS Comfort, the largest hospital ship in the world. Anchored 10 miles off the North Carolina coast, the Comfort is taking part in military maneuvers with over 18,000 armed forces personnel.
The hospital ships were designed to support land operations, particularly amphibious operations, but they're also designed for support of Army operations in places where we may be under attack or you can't establish a safe hospital. So we can sit off the coast 50 to 200 miles and receive patients by helicopter and provide the care here.
Hundreds of mock wounded arrive on board for treatment. Even though this is just an exercise, every casualty is searched for weapons. These maneuvers are designed to simulate a theater of war and to be as realistic as possible.
The patients are brought in and moved through the system, and we have tried to recreate a lot of the findings that you would have in a trauma setting that would represent a war and the hospital ship being stationed off the coast.
As soon as they enter the ship, the casualties are assessed for severity of injury.
What happened? What were you doing? Roll vehicle? Anything else, sir? Did you feel your hands? Did your chest? Okay, right chest laundry. We gotta get him out of here.
The casualties are then taken down to the main deck of the ship into the trauma room, where over 100 medical staff are ready to save their lives. The ER is just one part of the massive hospital complex. Hidden below decks are 4 intensive care units, 15 wards, 1,000 beds, and 10 X-ray machines. This is the 7th largest hospital in the U.S.
There are general surgeons, trauma surgeons, intensive care unit facilities, anesthesiologists, respiratory therapy, angiography, full radiology suite, intensive care units, and most of the stuff that you'd find in most large hospitals.
It even has a state-of-the-art CAT scanner to help diagnose internal injuries. And there are 12 operating suites. Patients and equipment have to be tied down during bad weather.
We have the operating rooms located on the midline at the deck that does the least movement, and we can actually tie down the tables and restrain the surgeons so that they can still do delicate work even if we're in a storm or in high seas.
Captain of the USNS Comfort is Richard Cicchetti.
Well, the hospital ship Comfort was a converted supertanker. It was originally built in 1975 in California. It was in the crude oil service for about 8 years, was laid up, and the government purchased it and converted it in 1987.
All right.
What they did was take off the main deck of the ship as if it was a sardine can, and then insert pre-assembled modules into the hull of the ship, and then they reclosed it back up.
The Comfort can travel to the heart of the war zone, yet treat its patients in safety.
The experience that we've had in places like the Gulf and in places like Somalia, where you have high winds, a lot of blowing sand, dust and dirt, that certainly compromises your sterility and the operating environment. So with the hospital ship here, we can bring patients from a field, clean them down, put them into a perfectly normal environment that you would have in any hospital in any large city, and reduce the risk of infection and also aid the recovery period. And we can relocate if necessary, which a land hospital can't do.
The USNS Comfort is one of the world's great ships. And for military personnel, it's literally a lifesaver. We have built many extraordinary ships to sail the seas. But we will always need to respect the ocean's awesome power. We may have conquered the land, but we will never truly conquer the sea.